Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Better Managers Briefing. I'm Anne Franco, the Chief Executive of the CMI, and each week at this time, we bring you news and views on management topics that matter. Now, today, I'm absolutely delighted to have as my guest CMI Companion and the Chief Executive of the award-winning financial services company OneFamily, Teddy Nyahasha. Welcome, Teddy. Lovely to see you.
Thanks, Frank, and good afternoon to everybody else there.
Great. Well, obviously, all of us have seen COVID challenges and opportunities. What have they been from one family's perspective?
There have been, I suppose, like everybody else, on a personal level. Clearly, it's been a challenge. I think we've all gone through having to deal with lockdown. But from a business perspective, I would probably say it's been mixed. Overall, probably positive. Um,
Hmm.
just a bit of a background on myself. I took over as CEO at the beginning of last year, so January. And one of the key things that I was trying to bring the business and working on the business was around the culture and changing the culture. And key to that was actually how we get as a business to work more collaboratively together.
Mm.
And then what happened was we then had the lockdown that came in. We had to basically adjust, but it brought a lot of opportunities for us because it actually accelerated some of that cultural drive. Because one of the key things we're trying to look at is how do we create that burning platform that gets colleagues who are working in different departments to work collaboratively. And
Hmm.
I was blown away. I was amazed by the response and reaction from our people. It wasn't driven by a top line directive, but as we were scrambling to make sure that colleagues were safe. And I suppose just the background is most pre pre to COVID, I'd say probably 95% of the business was in the building. So
Hmm.
colleagues would come into the building every day. So we were bricks and mortars business. And then overnight, we had to transform ourselves to just about 90% people working remotely and 10% of the fewer working in the office. And something like that, we would have probably said would have taken us years to galvanize and get people moving. But what I saw was remarkable uh, resilience, remarkable ingenuity, and resourcefulness from our people from all parts of the business. And that focus on making sure colleagues were safe was kind of what galvanized the business. So, I say, in an odd way, from that cultural perspective, it brought in an acceleration of some of the behaviors that we were looking to bring in. So overall, I think it's positive from a colleague perspective, but it went beyond that because once we kind of had looked after ourselves, it allowed us to have and engage with conversations with some of our partners. So One
Yeah.
Family tends to sell a lot of its products through brokers.
Hmm.
And a lot of those businesses tend to be smaller business than ours, and they were clearly struggling. And kind of there was more of the question of the uncertainty of the future. The pandemic has actually allowed us to cement those relationships and
Hmm.
build much stronger relationships with even partners that we had not really had strong relationships in the past. So, in a way, because of the disruption that was caused by the pandemic, it actually accelerated some of the both the business growth as well as the cultural aspects, which are key for me because that's going to just reinforce that when everything else is down, the biggest asset you have is your people. And it's
Mm.
how do you galvanize and how do you bring a sense of purpose. And now the challenge we all have now is how we hold on to some of those aspects and be able to work cross business lines with a single goal and continue creating those virtual burning platforms that basically energize the group and get everybody on a on a kind of an energized single focus.
Yeah, so it's really interesting what you say there, Teddy. I mean, firstly, what you said about how you lead and manage people makes the biggest difference. That completely chimes with CMI's research. And I have to say, your experience of the amazing things people can do when you
Mm.
galvanize them and trust them and put them first. We've certainly seen that. And also with our partners, like you, we partner with a lot of organizations. So I'm delighted that you've had those positive experiences, and they do really resonate with a lot of what we've seen. And your key question, which is going to be my next question, is how do you hold on to that? So as we emerge from this pandemic, you know, how will you take those opportunities on culture and collaboration forward? And what previous practices are you planning, if any, to bring back? You know, how are you approaching the famous hybrid working?
Yeah.
You know, what will you change about how you manage and lead one family? And how are you going to use your office? A lot of questions there.
Well, as everybody can see, today I'm in the office. So
Hmm.
I've been coming into the office. Started off at the beginning, I was coming in every day of the week, and that was because at the beginning of the lockdown, it was trying to be in solidarity with a few colleagues we were requiring to come into the office. And at the time, if you recall, I think there was a bigger concern. People had a greater concern of, you know, coming into the office, and it just felt the right thing to do to be in with the people we are asking to be in the office.
Hmm.
Having said that, as we moved through the various phases of the lockdown, there was then a period where staying at home had a fatigue element to it, and we were actually seeing a lot of colleagues wanting to come into the office. And I've ended up having almost a hybrid where I spend half the time in the office and half the time working from home. Um, One of the key things I've found through, you know, this level of communication, you know, having conversations over Teams or video conferencing, it's allowed us to have better conversations with each other as colleagues within the business. And by that I mean you're moving away from a conversation where it is very much task oriented to one where you actually are allowed, because as you are having a conversation with a colleague who's working from home, it just becomes an icebreaker to actually have a conversation beyond the day job.
Hmm.
Because, and I actually felt through this process, I've got to know my colleagues and indeed my broader network much more, because we've, you know, it's allowed us to have a broader conversation rather than just a task oriented conversation. And that's something that I really want to hold on to, that we're not defined by the jobs we do. There's
Hmm.
more to us than just the jobs that we work. And by missing that link with the other part of somebody's life and importance, you almost then miss the kind of the background and the drivers of what's influencing everybody. So I think one of the things I'm really keen that we hold on to is that the permission we've been given to be curious and a bit more intrusive into each other's personal lives and to
Hmm.
know each other a bit better. And I think we should just hold on to that and cement that. Having
Hmm.
said that, it works, and it's been working because, you know, we started as an organization with 500 people. We knew each other more or less. So when we were working from home and we started working from home, you still had a view of the face to a name. But over the lockdown, we've also recruited new colleagues, and it's interesting to observe that they've become almost the class of May 2020, and the only people they've seen are the people that where they had an induction with. So I strongly believe part of what makes us stronger as a unit is, you know, the same elements of what makes a tribe is, you know, that those touch points. So I'm
Hmm.
very much, whilst I cherish the opportunities of being able to have more deeper conversations through media such as, you know, Teams. I also think long for that personal, informal meeting people in the corridors, teams getting together, um, you know, just having that physical presence. So it does lead to the form of what we'll be doing, which is probably not different to many other organizations, is we will introduce more flexible working,
Hmm.
but it will be on a managed basis, which will enable that colleagues can actually meet purposefully. And therefore, the worst thing you want to do to a person is they come into the office and they find all they have to do in the office is go back onto their headsets and screens because the rest of their colleagues are working from home. So to some extent, there is a bit of a coordination that you need to do that. Having said that, we realize through this experience that we probably don't need the level of office space that we have
Hmm.
currently. So that's an efficiency for
Hmm.
a business. Um, before the lockdown, we were already moving to a world where we were all trying to intermingle. So right now, people will probably observe that I am in an office. Um, Pre to lockdown, we had committed that we would all be on the floor, so open plan, and therefore that way we kind of get to know each other and meet and kind of remove some of those ivory towers that at times you can walk blindly into. But what we now have is an opportunity to have even a more fluid situation where you will be having colleagues from different parts and different departments sharing similar space, equal space, and occupying less space, and therefore it has both the benefit of cost savings on floor space, but then also just bringing people closer together.
Yeah, which is great. And obviously, most companies are doing hybrid working. Um, and you're using that office for collaboration and interpersonal contact, which is great. Now, many say ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance aspects and purpose, has become even more important in the pandemic. Do you agree? And what is One Family doing in this area? I know you've just launched something. And what do you think other business leaders should be doing?
Yeah. Um, I totally agree that ESG is no longer a buzzword. It's something we should all step into, and if anything, 2020 has been an acceleration of it to
Hmm.
some extent. One family's journey on, particularly if I start maybe on the environment part, we've been probably a bit too modest. So we started kind of what we called ethical investments as far back as 2012, before it
Hmm.
became a buzzword.
Yeah.
But equally, if I reflect back on that, the modesty has also meant that we probably have not pushed ourselves as far as we should have. And if anything, that's the things that around environment is you can always do more.
Yeah.
So last year and further this year, we've launched our two new funds, which will be investment funds, which are focused primarily on companies that are effectively green companies, and therefore having policies that are environmentally friendly. But there's a bit of a wave that's coming through, and we are looking forward to COP and the Glasgow conference if it does take place this year, which would see a further acceleration. But I see it as it's not just about what we do in terms of influence in other companies, is what we actually do ourselves as an organization, and to some extent what we do as individuals. And that's one
Hmm.
of the things that we've been working with. We've got a fantastic uh, group of colleagues who are kind of, I'll call it, our environmental advocates, which is self-selecting people who feel passionate about it. And they've been driving a lot of even small ticket items such as recycling and where and tree planting, and it's those small things that add up to a lot, as well as those big ticket items such as making sure that we're holding companies that we invest in account to account.
Hmm.
The S part of ESG is the one that I feel really passionate about, because I feel, particularly in financial services in the UK, is the one that we probably have not really done a great job at.
Hmm.
And this is about social inclusion.
Yep.
If I look at a lot of products in the financial services sector, they tend to be skewed towards a middle class and beyond type range of products. And that for itself is kind of creates financial services almost as a exclusive club where you almost have high barriers for entry. One family being a mutual and a member owned organization, we probably have more permissions to be more inclusive in our product set. And so whilst we pride ourselves in terms of the bulk of our members and customers are probably ones that we'll classify as in the lower levels of society, we could do a lot more, making sure that our products are more accessible. That includes how do we make sure that education, financial literacy is kind of permeates through society, and how do we make sure that the products that we're selling are speaking to the man on the street. So there's a lot more that we can do as an organization. We are starting on it, but I genuinely think that that social, being a socially responsible organization is something that I hold dear. And it comes from partly from a personal drive. My own background is that I'm one generation from peasant farmers.
Hmm.
So I kind of genuinely believe in social mobility, and I kind of see myself as,
Yeah.
I can see myself in those shoes of, for me, it's not about um, capability. I think everybody has it in themselves. It's just making sure that the tools that are out there are democratically distributed. And unfortunately, that's one of the areas when financial services, in particular, particularly UK financial services, we could do a lot more in making that access to a broad range of products to a much wider part of the populace.
That's an excellent point, and actually, it's so great that that also resonates with your own personal journey. That's a great, um, um, you're a great role model for that. Then that social mobility, and it's a great point you make. We need to see more of it. But on the subject of equality, and by the way, if you have a question for Teddy, we are going to be taking questions later on in the broadcast. Please put your questions in the chat. We'll get to as many as we can. But now, of course, on that social mobility, that's the broader theme is equality. And we know in this pandemic, certain groups, women, ethnic minorities, young people have been harder hit. So what do we need to do that we don't emerge with even greater inequality? And what are some of the things that you're doing and would like to see other business leaders and maybe government do?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'll probably start with gender, which
Mm-hmm.
on the surface might appear to be the easier one because it's something that you'd hope most people can relate to. Because hopefully most people will have a mother, who have a sister, and therefore whichever side you have, it's something that you can relate. But it's also one that we've struggled with.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I do welcome the fact that we're having more companies make more public disclosures, because I do feel and believe that at times transparency and
Yeah.
market discipline does force behaviors, and probably is a better regulator of behaviors than maybe having somebody, government, come in stamping down. So I welcome the wave of disclosures that everybody has been doing on gender and
Like gender pay gap reporting and
gender
things.
pay
Mm-hmm.
gap and everything,
Mm-hmm.
because I think that in itself will drive, even if there's a reluctance in certain quarters. I'll always say financial services is not at the forefront when it comes to
Not.
gender, and it's something that I think it's a shame.
Yeah.
Um, and so within one family, whilst if you look at one family's makeup, particularly the board and exec, it's a bit flattering because we are 50-50 in terms
Well,
of,
you have a female chair, actually.
we've got a female child.
Yeah.
But it's not about being smug and resting on your laurels. This is about how, at times, even that level of success can be a blind spot in its own right. So, what we've been really doing over the course of this year is challenging ourselves, not just focusing on that top level, but is how do we make sure that there's the invisible barriers that stop somebody from aspiring? Because it's not all about, whether the things, the doors are being shut. It's also, we are trying to reverse, in certain cases, years and years of practice, which have then become almost a culture.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to be awake to some of those, and the pandemic showed some of that, because what we are seeing was even the simple things of distribution of kind of the house
Yep.
responsibilities, where I was having colleagues where they were clearly, when we were all homeschooling and having
Yep.
to, okay, there was a disproportional weighting on female colleagues taking the burden uh, back in the home. And it's therefore walk us up to the fact that the things you there's a difference between saying you're creating a level playing field and putting a rule for everybody. That's not equality.
No.
Equality is actually being able to relate to the individual and making sure that that individual, you are addressing their own hurdle and the barrier that is stopping them from basically aspiring to be better. And I've been lucky that I've had quite a number of great conversations with female colleagues within the business, where at times you actually see it from a point of view that even behaviorally, somebody who you look at and say, you have all the attributes, and you are, um, you, you have the right attitude. The only thing that then thing is that self-belief, and it's part of it that you're working against things that have been chipping away. And then if you take it in broader society, one of the things that happened more recently is, the unfortunate cases where we see how society remains at large biased against females, and that's
Mm-hmm.
been a bit of a wake-up call. When we are
Mm-hmm.
talking about, even the national debate of, is it okay for a lady to walk at a particular time in the evening? That just shows the invisible biases that we have in society, which is the things that we need to start waking up to and chipping away. And the
Yeah.
same goes to all the other diversity pillars. I'll look at race. For me, the moment from a race perspective, probably last year, was the George Floyd, um, uh, what happened to George Floyd, because on the one hand, there was a positive impact of that, because what I saw was, particularly with the younger generation, a coming together of society from all parts. That gave me hope. However, I can't lie, in terms of from a personal perspective, I had to wrestle with myself, my own feelings. And what it allowed me to do is to actually, at times, is just having that awkward conversation
Mm-hmm.
and allowing ourselves. So for us, for society to move forward, it's about also how do we engage with ourselves. So I had a session with a virtual town hall, and one of my great colleagues basically hosted it, and he was asking me, what questions should I ask you? And I mean, said, well, if we can't be safe within our own small environment where you don't have to be sensitive of the questions you're asking me, or rather you take that wobbly step forward, and at least we're moving. You will get certain things wrong. You will probably say certain things in the wrong way, but that starts a conversation. And for me, that's one of the things that I've kind of picked up, that at times it does mean we all need to open up. We all need
Yep.
to allow those awkward conversations that maybe we're not all, out of politeness we avoid, because I I,
It's
I
such a
I
great
genuinely think
point.
they're great. I think all in all, I firmly believe that 90% of humankind, and we saw that in the marches and the uproar that we saw over the George Floyd incident. I firmly believe 90% of human society is good. It's the silence of that 90% that allows the 10% to push through. And what we should be doing is continually challenging ourselves around our own passiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll put that as a challenge to self, that at times I look back and challenge, have I done enough? And the answer is no, I could do a lot more. So
So
that's
I think there's some fabulous points there, and they really chime with some work CMI has done on race about having the awkward conversations and challenging your own passivity. Now, I want to get to the questions, and I know there are a lot of questions um, that have built up, but I'm going to ask just before we get to those questions, just in a brief couple of words, what's the biggest lesson you've learned personally as a leader throughout this time?
biggest lesson for me is be yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Don't try to be somebody else. And follow your gut, your feel. It's easier to do your job when you are passionate about what you do,
Mm-hmm.
and it stops being a job. It becomes it's not a hobby, but it's that much easier. And that's the thing that I've learned about myself. And the final thing is, you can never over communicate.
Yeah, great advice. Thank you so much. We've got lots of questions. The first one is from Ado. If you were to recruit a new manager within your organization, what are the top 3 traits you'd be looking for in this new normal? Great question.
No, fantastic question, Ado. So I suppose one of it is, I, I want to believe in people who believe in themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they do say it gets lonely at the top. I feel uncomfortable when I've sat in a room where everybody agrees with me. Um, and colleagues will probably say that at times, even if I bring an idea and then I find the rest of the room agreeing, I would naturally go as the challenge, the position on paper. I think diversity, when we talk about diversity, it has to also include diversity of thought.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what makes great organizations, where you have different views been coming through, and that we're not just bringing the same mindset, albeit packaged in a different in a different shape or body or size or color. The other thing I would want to is nimbleness, and
Mm-hmm.
in terms of, we our success is predicated on our ability to move with speed.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, it's probably ownership.
Mm-hmm.
The one trait, you can have the most technically gifted individual, but unless they own their space, the thing you cannot force a person to do, and hold them to account. You can't put a kind of a balanced scorecard, is how a person applies themselves. And
Yeah.
therefore it is about owning their space, and that's probably has been um, come through in leaps and bounds this year, but it's something that I've always held as a quality that I've seen most important. Once a person has the attitude, it almost makes up for the aptitude.
Yeah, that's a great point. So another question from June. I'm interested to know if you think your colleagues' productivity has been affected during the pandemic.
Great question, June. Yes, in certain quarters. When we started, we probably had, in part of the business, we're 20% down in productivity.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there are parts of the business where, because it naturally, the elements of the business where a person by being home by themselves is less productive, because normally you turn your chair around and ask a colleague who knows something else. So whilst the positive is that it's forced colleagues to know a bit more about what their business is, it's also meant that they don't have that natural reference point that you would have and in a room. So we are still not as back to kind of the pre-COVID productivity for certain parts of the business, and those are the parts of the business we'll probably look to bring back in sooner, because it
Mm-hmm.
just, you need the teamwork dynamics there.
Okay. Um, Next question is from Yvonne. What initiatives does your company use to promote mental health and well-being amongst your colleagues? One of the top concerns in this pandemic.
No, it's been a challenge for it. I think I was lucky that I've had colleagues who've been so focused on it in two fronts. We have, prior to the pandemic, we had what we call our mental health first aiders. These are
Mm-hmm.
colleagues
Yep.
who, as almost at the side of their desks, they've been through training, and it's about identifying those aspects. And what we found is the mental health first aiders have actually come to the fore through the lockdown, because it's about being able to identify those aspects where it might not be visible to somebody else. And as we all been locked out in our own little bubbles at home, it just meant that we need to have more conversations to be able to identify that. We've also been holding quite a number of mental health initiatives, some of them externally outsourced,
Mm-hmm.
where we're not necessarily the experts in it. And we've also given, at the beginning of the pandemic, gave everybody else access to a well-being app.
Mm-hmm.
It's the mindfulness type initiatives, and through it is just that continual reminder, particularly as people have been working from home consistently, of just the things that you need to watch out for. You
Yep.
can't just sit on your desk. You need to also exercise, lift your head. But I'll admit, one of the biggest challenges has been, as the worlds have merged between the work environment and the personal life, part of the biggest challenges that colleagues have had to face has actually been nothing to do with the office. It's the frustration of loved ones who you can't get to when they're not feeling well. And it's as much about how you support that. And therefore, this is where going at the beginning, that it's allowed us, given us the permission that we can and we should focus on the work and the life beyond just what happens in the office environment. And it's being awake to those things, or the triggers that may not be necessarily be visible because it's not being driven by what's happening in the work front. So the host of activities that we've been doing and will continue doing, um, to just support that and promote, people being more aware, because part of it is awareness, and reaching out and being able to reach out when they need to, and not have a stigma around it.
Very important. So our last question comes from Ruth, and it builds on exactly what you said here. Would you agree that remote working is given the opportunity to build relationships with other colleagues as we take more time to have those more personal-based conversations?
I totally agree, Ruth. I've seen more cats and dogs than I thought I would ever see. Um, and in particular cats, you do observe that when somebody you're talking to a colleague and then a cat basically walks across the screen, and that just becomes a great icebreaker, and you just learn the passion. Or from a colleague who's sat in front of a bookshelf and you cannot help but just observe what books they read,
Yeah, yeah,
and from that you have a lot of touch points. So I agree with you that, and this is the thing I really worry that we should not lose,
yeah. You said
because
that.
that's deep in that relationship, but it goes beyond colleagues. I actually felt as a new, as a new CEO coming in, one of the things that you always focus on trying to build your network.
Yeah.
And the the challenge with, in the old world, building network meant that you're trying to, get diaries to match so that you meet for a lunch, and therefore because you never get the coincident once, you probably will fit 4 meetings in a month. Whereas with this, it just meant that, I've been able to reach out to and have conversation with a lot more people because it's easier to arrange. So we should really embrace that, um, and continue some of this, going forward. I mean, obviously, you always supplement it with hopefully meeting in person, but even for, where we all time poor, this has been a great lesson that actually there's more we can do with the little bit of time we have on the networking.
Well, that's a brilliant insight and observations. And thank you so much, Teddy Nyahasha, CEO of One Family, for joining us. And if you've enjoyed this conversation, why don't you consider joining CMI? You can find out how to do so in the chat. Thank you so much, and take care.
Thanks, Anne. Cheers all.